Superman, episode 5, The Death of Superman. Oh boy. And it's the Icon back with another DC animated television review for you. Once again, shout out to Imaginative Visions with the pre-release of Superman, My Adventures of Superman. Hit that notification bell, like it or subscribe, and let's get started. So in the last episode, Hank Henshaw was basically about to take over Metropolis. John was trying to save his parents because he was like something bad happens to them. And I said this in the last review because episode 4, John was acting very weird towards Kara to the point where he was like overly all over Lois, and he was basically like giving Kara the cold shoulder. He wasn't talking to her, like he basically wasn't trying to fuck with her. And I said either she did something to him in the future, or she was the one that raised him after his parents died. And then lo and behold, come to find out, because there was a moment where once Henshaw took over the city, Superman, Supergirl, and Superboy, the three of them went into action and tried to go save the day. And then there was a moment where Superboy was going to take on Henshaw full force. He had on like shielding, like kryptonite shielding. And then Kara was just like, let me assist you in taking him down. And then he was like, no. And then Kara was just like, boy, what did I do to you in the future? She was like, did I kick your dog or something? She said, you've avoided me. You're like, you don't talk to me. She said, you haven't even looked me in the eye since you've been here. She said, what did I do to you that was so bad? And then he was like, you didn't do anything. He said, after my parents died, you were the one that raised me. And I was like, I knew it. So he said after his parents died, she took him in, taught him how to use his power. She basically became like his surrogate mother. Like I said, and I called that shit from Jump Street. But the funny thing is, when Henshaw attacked, Superboy was just like, oh, this is my chance to try to stop Henshaw before he kills my parents. And they were making it seem like Superman was going to die right here in Metropolis. But that can't be, because realistically speaking, Superman and Lois aren't supposed to die until they give birth to Jonathan Kent. So the fact that she's not pregnant, like, and they're not married and they don't live on the farm, that means whatever this battle was that they were currently having in Metropolis, he wasn't supposed to die during that battle. But everybody kept acting like this was the battle where, like, he finally catches a bullet. It turned into like this whole big thing. The three of them were trying to fight. Hank Henshaw bust out the kryptonite, which is used to like power his robotics, and then he basically gave Clark like a full dose of it. He hit Clark with so much kryptonite, he actually had like kryptonite crystals coming out of his body, coming out of his eyes and everything. So like I said, Kara tried to fight him, it didn't work. She took him out. Lois went to Lex's office and punched Lex in the face, and then she was like, this is your fault, you need to fix this shit. Lex actually tried to stop him. He tried to shut him down with the computer, but then Hank rolled up on him. He blew up the computer, so it's like that wasn't going to work. And then it finally came down to like Superboy versus Hank Henshaw. And Superboy got his ass beat. So Superboy was getting his ass beat. Clark saw him getting ready to get his head squeezed like a grape, and then I guess he tapped into the power of adrenaline. I mean, the way because he did that I think he did that in season 2, where he tapped into like some internal power. He turned blue, like his eyes turned blue, and then he just went ballistic. This happened again to where the over adrenaline that Clark produced in his body, it overpowered the kryptonite in his system. The way he described it was he basically burnt himself out. Because once Clark tapped into that power, he started glowing, his eyes turned blue, and then he basically whooped Henshaw's ass. First, Henshaw got pissed too, because when Henshaw realized that John kept calling him dad, dad, and then there was a moment where he was like, wait a minute, that's your kid? He said, you motherfuckers are breeding now? So that he got really upset, because he was determined to kill Superboy. And then he was like, I'm never going to have a family, and you get a family, and blah, blah, blah. But because Superman, like tapped into like the deepest, darkest crevices of his power, he basically fucked up Hank Henshaw, blew him up. He yanked the kryptonite out of his system. He actually broke the kryptonite with his bare hands. And then eventually Hank just shut down, and then he got upset because he was like, the world chose you over me. I was supposed to be a hero. And then that was pretty much it. So then we never saw Kara. Well, Kara and Superboy hugged each other. He said goodbye to her. And then John said goodbye to his parents, and he was just like, I got to go home because there was a timer on the watch. I got to go back before it runs out of power. And then Lois was just like, did we save the world? And then he was like, of course, because we're super people and we're going to be together in the future. And then he disappeared, and then he ended up going back to back to the future. Superman then had a conversation with Lois, and he basically told Lois, he said that I overexerted myself. He said that it took so much of me, strenuous power for me to get rid of, the kryptonite, to fight through the kryptonite. He said, I don't have my powers. They're treating it like he lost his powers altogether, but what it is, because he had like his kryptonite cells that give him his solar energy, and then he had like the kryptonite. Between the kryptonite cells and his own, and his own personal like solar cells, he basically burnt himself out. Like that was pretty much it. So the next episode, he's probably gonna be wandering around in a cane, talking about how like I can't save the world anymore. And then Supergirl's gonna be like, "Don't worry, Kal-El, like I'll take over." And then eventually, they're probably gonna throw him in the sun, or he just needs more time for the sun to rejuvenate him, for him to make a full recovery, and for him to come back. So like, but that's why they call it the death of Superman, not because he died, but because he lost his power. And then Lois was basically, she was like, but it's okay, Clark. She's like, we may have lost Superman, but we saved Clark Kent, and everything's going to be fine, right? Everything in the future is going to be fine, right? Wrong. Because we fast forward to the future now, because since they took out Hank Henshaw, the future changed. When we go back to the future, Superboy is tied up. He's in chains, and he got tied up by Slade Wilson, and Slade referred to him as one of the rebels. And then he said, and then Lex showed up, bald head and everything. And then Lex said to him, he was like, "My boy, you were trying to travel through time, escape through time, or whatever." He was like, "What kind of dumb motherfucker gave you that idea to travel through time to save the world?" And I'm just like, "You did." So like the funny thing is, like, Lex was the one that actually gave him the idea. But now, because the future changed, instead of Hank Henshaw being the person that takes over the world, it actually ends up being Lex Luthor that takes over the world, because there was no Hank Henshaw there to stop him. And because Superman doesn't have his powers, I'm going to assume he kills Superman or whatever. But no, he can't kill him, because since he's aware of Superboy, there has to be, like, Clark has to die later. So Clark gets his powers back eventually, and then Lex is going to kill him. But now, as far as the future is concerned, Lex is the one that takes over the world. Clark doesn't have his power. I don't know where Jimmy was. Jimmy drove Lois to the city, and then we never seen Jimmy again. But that was pretty much it. And thank you for tuning in. So like I said, so the show's getting interesting now. Like the first 3 episodes were complete filler, and now we're getting into the meat of it. We're getting into the thick of it. I'm interested to see like the change in the dynamics, like with the future and the present. Because like I said, because every time he changes something, it's almost like somebody is destined to take over the world, and every time you stop one person from taking over the world, another person steps up and takes his place. But we'll see. But share your questions, comments, and concerns down below, and let's continue to talk about it. What you think about episode 5 of My Adventures of Superman? And so leave your comments down below. Check me out all over TikTok, on X, on Instagram, and YouTube, where you can leave those questions, comments, and concerns. Check out my previous 4 reviews for My Adventures of Superman. Check out my Supergirl review, which is up on my channel. And like I said, I look forward to bringing you some more of My Adventures of Superman as we conclude to episode 6. So that was it, guys. So thanks for tuning in. Up and away as always. And until then, when we find out what the future holds, we're out this. Yeah!